Good evening, everybody. Hello. My name is Sarah Rawlings from the MS Society, and it's my absolute pleasure to welcome you here tonight, and including those who are watching the live stream, to the 8th Stop MS Appeal Annual Lecture, Transforming Trials for Progressive MS, Technology, Talent and Tentacles. For many of you, this probably isn't your first annual lecture, but for those of you joining us for the first time, welcome, and thank you so much for supporting the MS Society. We are the largest charity funder of MS research in the UK, and also play a world-leading role in improving the quality of life of people with MS. We hold this lecture every year to provide the latest updates to the entire everyone in the MS community, and we're really delighted that you could join us here this evening. Over 130,000 people in the UK have multiple sclerosis. It's unpredictable and different for everybody. It's often painful and exhausting, and it can cause problems with how people walk, move, see, think and feel. We know what people with MS want: no relapses, no accumulation of disability, and also no uncertainty. They want us to find treatments that slow or stop progression for everybody. This is why we started the Stop MS Appeal, and we hope to have treatments for all types of MS in late-stage trials by the end of 2025. The appeal started in 2015, and we've already successfully secured over £70 million. Thank you to all of our amazing supporters who've made this happen, because we really couldn't have achieved this without your incredible support. We're now closer to stopping MS than we ever have been, but we still have a way to go, and we need to raise another £30 million by the end of 2025. Thanks to the money raised so far, we've been able to co-fund groundbreaking clinical trials such as Chariot MS, MS STAT2, and this year we've finally been able to launch Octopus, the world's first multi-arm, multi-stage trial for progressive MS. This mega trial will transform the way that we test treatments and could deliver findings up to 3 times faster than traditional trials. The first site in London is now recruiting, and the trial team are working extremely hard getting other sites up and running across the country. This is the biggest project that we've ever funded, and that's why we still really need your support. You can donate today to help support Octopus and also to help stop MS. And if you'd like to do so, then you can find more information by scanning the QR code on the leaflet that you've been given today. The MS Society is very proud to be working with leading scientists, and tonight's speaker, Professor Helen Ford, is no exception to that. Helen is consultant neurologist and clinical lead of the West Yorkshire MS Treatment Programme at Leeds Teaching Hospitals NHS Trust, and also honorary clinical professor of neurology at the University of Leeds. And I'm also delighted to say that she's going to be the recruitment HUD lead for Octopus in Yorkshire as well. Helen will share more about her work with Octopus and other trials for progressive MS in her lecture, and thank you again, Helen, for agreeing to come and speak to us tonight. During Helen's lecture, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask, then you can ask them online using Slido. And after the lecture, a panel of researchers will be able to answer a few of them. You just need to visit slido.com and submit a question using the event code #MSLecture23. So please do feel free to ask a question. But first, I'm absolutely delighted to introduce Elsa Guidi, who will also be joining the panel after the lecture. Elsa was one of our first Octopus participants and will share a few words about her experiences. Thanks, Elsa.
Thank you very much for asking me to talk this evening, and thank you for all the progress made so far on the Octopus trial, and thank you to the MS Society for funding research and for the support for people living with MS. When I first got my tub of medication for the Octopus trial, I was very amused to see it was a large white tub, much like Quentin Blake might have drawn for Charlie's Marvellous Medicine. A large white tub, a large white label, nothing else. No pharmaceutical marking, nothing except the words. On closer inspection, it says, it may contain immediate release metformin or alpha-lipoic acid or a placebo. And that is a reminder, that label does remind me that this is a trial, this is not a treatment for MS. And that's why we need this research, and we need to find treatments that improve outcomes for people living with MS like me and for our loved ones. I'm really pleased to be taking part in the Octopus trial, to join a long history of progress in MS research. And I'm not eligible for the current medication, so really joining the trial is the best thing that I can do for myself. I'm taking 2 pills twice a day, attending the necessary appointments, either in person or on the phone. I'm being closely monitored by all the staff, and I'm getting much more brave about MRI scans. On the day I started the trial, there was a sense of excitement. The team gave me this orange octopus, and I decided it would come everywhere with me, and it's now got its own Instagram account. I was diagnosed with MS 26 years ago after 2 separate episodes of optic neuritis. It was mild to start with, but fatigue was always an issue, and I medically retired in 2007. After a relapse in 2015, I used crutches to walk safely. I now walk short distances using a 2-wheel walker, or I use a wheelchair to go out and about. And I also have a wonderful blue electric folding tricycle for outdoor adventures with my family. In February 22, my neurologist and I agreed that I had moved to secondary progressive MS. It feels quite different from that initial diagnosis. The word progressive is frightening. There aren't treatment choices, and it makes me feel like I'm at the top of a downward slope with no idea knowing how steep that slope is. As I've said, being involved in the trial is the best thing I can do right now. Living with MS means you have to adjust and adapt life so that you can continue doing the things you want to do. I've adjusted by putting the necessary tools in place so that I can live my life as I want to, and I'm ready to meet the challenges that MS sometimes throws at me. I use the walker, the trike, the wheelchair, so that I can join in the activities I want to do. Sometimes I have to adapt the way I do things. In 2019, I learnt to drive using hand controls. I use a push-pull brake accelerator and a steering ball. So the push to brake, pull to accelerate probably makes sense. The steering ball, I mean, you can think of it either it's like driving a forklift truck or spinning a lettuce dryer. One of those will make sense to you. My right hand is less dexterous than it used to be, and this affects my writing, so I've adapted that. Sometimes I have to move the paper instead of the pen. My handwriting's not the same, but it still has a certain style. My favourite adaptations and tools are the ones that give me a different life experience. For example, I used to ski quite well, competent on a red, less elegant on an icy black. But doing adapted skiing in the Alps with a French ski school instructor, you feel amazing. You come down a black run at full tilt, making every turn, keeping up with the family, even outpacing them, with wind in your hair, a huge smile on your face, and you arrive at the bottom, the perfect combination of exhilarated and just a little bit terrified. I've used this example because 2 weeks after going on the Octopus trial, I went away to France with a favourite group of families and friends, and I took the Octopus with me. And one afternoon, my ski instructor, Christophe, took me and the Octopus up to the top. We went to the very top of the resort, and we were allowed to catch the very last chairlift all the way to the top. So after that, the chairlift stopped, so we were the only people up there. We looked at this breathtaking 363-degree view of mountain tops. Mont Blanc was hidden by clouds, snow-capped peaks all around us, the tree line in the village somewhere below. We were the only people up there. And at 2,487 meters, definitely the only octopus. Living with MS is tough. It can be isolating. Some friendships deepen as people come on the journey with you. Some might fade away. You have to use your time to do the things that you enjoy. You have a limited amount of energy vouchers to use, so you have to spend them wisely. And for some, that might be developing your career, or going to museums with your family, or doing yoga and Pilates, or being part of an online book group, or making trips to the cinema with friends. Whatever you do, I would also suggest, maybe, just maybe, try taking an octopus skiing. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak this evening, and thank you for all the fundraising and research that has brought us this far in the octopus trial.
Thank you so much, Elsa. We really, really appreciate you saying a few words tonight. Thank you. Now I'm delighted to introduce Professor Helen Ford, who's giving the lecture this evening.
So what a great audience we've got tonight, and isn't it fantastic to be celebrating where we are with the Stop MS appeal. So much progress has been made already, and so much to come, and fantastic to hear Elsa's story as one of the first participants in Octopus. So it's an absolute honour for me to be a new ambassador for the MS Society, and I was delighted when Emma invited me to give this year's lecture. Emma says that I tend to say yes to what she asks me, and what I just have to let Emma know is, on behalf of the panel, we haven't agreed to do a Tina Turner tribute tonight, okay? I've been asked to talk really about where we are in practice with some of the trials that the appeal has been funding. And I work as a clinical neurologist in Leeds, and I'm also attached to the University of Leeds as a clinical professor of neurology. And I just have a wonderful job, actually. I mean, I love working with people with MS. I'm an MS specialist. So my job is based in clinics and on the ward with people with MS and on our day case unit. But I've also got a whole series of different trials at different stages of people's experience with MS. So in the diagnostic phase of MS, living with MS, so studies on employment and MS, and then I'm very involved in the clinical trial program of MS. And part of the wonderful joy of that work is the collaboration across different groups. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, because I think that's the basis of the success of the work that we're all trying to do together in MS. So here we go. This was back at Frontiers last year, and many of you will know Jeremy Chataway, who has been a real driver in the progressive MS trials, which we're going to talk about tonight. But I think it is all about how we work together, and you can't imagine the number of people that are involved actually in bringing these trials into practice. So going back to the clinical scientists who are working on discovery, to the academics working on the trial designs, to all of the people in the clinical trials unit. So they're incredible behind-the-scenes people that we don't really know about, who are doing all of the careful organization, statistical analysis. So there's a whole crowd out there. And then, obviously, my heart's in the NHS, so also all of our wonderful clinical teams in the NHS. And one of the things when we're thinking about research is that there is really good evidence that hospitals that are involved in research have better outcomes for the patients that attend those hospitals. So there is a knock-on effect of clinicians being involved in research. And, you know, there's a real push now to make us think that research shouldn't be an add-on. Research should be part of our normal clinical practice. So our mission, and Linford is here on the panel from Leeds as well, our mission is that everybody with MS coming to our clinics gets an opportunity to participate in research, and that may be a different kind of study. It could be blood sampling, it could be questionnaires, it could be a clinical trial, but just having that opportunity to participate. So what I'm going to talk to you about is these 3 trials in progressive MS that the Stop MS appeal has been helping. So the MS STAT2 trial, which you'll have all been familiar with, which has been a trial of high-dose simvastatin in people with progressive MS. So what you've got to remember is all of these trials are what we call randomized trials, so they're randomized against a placebo, as Elsa pointed out. This is the biggest investigator-led trial that there has been in progressive MS. So fantastic. I mean, I think we need to all be celebrating the progress of these trials. So 964 people recruited across 31 NHS sites. And STAT2 is now in the follow-up phase. Then we've got Klaus Schiemerer here, who's the chief investigator for Chariot MS, and this is a trial in people with advanced MS. So Chariot is still recruiting, so it's at a different stage from STAT2, and they're sort of almost halfway there, actually. 86 people at 20 different sites, and 200 people planned. And then the news of the moment is Octopus, and we have our big orange octopus here to remind us. So Octopus is just starting, so we're at the start of a really big journey with Octopus. So we'll talk a little bit about how we got there, and that's probably some of the technology that's been involved in this. So I wanted to involve our participants in my lecture tonight. So I've been talking to some of the participants in our trials in Leeds, and this is Camilla. Camilla's really inspirational to me. She's been on the Oceans of Hope yacht, and in fact, I don't know if you've seen it. I mean, it looks pretty amazing. I was a bit gutted when she told me that they'd pulled into Barcelona and it was a European MS meeting that I was at. And I did think she could have called her neurologist and said, Helen, would you like to come on our yacht while we're here? But, you know, Oceans of Hope, I mean, it says what we're talking about tonight, really, isn't it? It is about what hope these trials give. And this is what Camilla said about taking part in the trials, because she didn't think that there was much research out there. So this was starting in MS STAT2. And in a way, that shows how we've moved on, that I can talk to you tonight about 3 big trials that are going on, funded by the MS Society. She also pointed out the perks. One of the perks was seeing her clinicians more frequently, so seeing her neurologist and also seeing the research nurses. And this is Claire, one of the research nurses, and she says, you know, how professional Claire was. There's a lot of work to be done in research trials, but also how fun. So we hope to make the trials, you know, not a really, you know, strenuous experience, but, you know, that we're working on it together. And this was the recruitment, which is complete, of STAT2, which is fantastic. And we have the little, it all seems a bit of a blur now, doesn't it, the years of the pandemic, but this is just to remind you of COVID and what happened to the trial during COVID, because obviously we couldn't run the research clinics, we couldn't recruit new people into the trial. So it's amazing when you think about it that we've managed to succeed with this trial despite the impact of the COVID pandemic. And this is what I think is fantastic, is looking at this map and seeing all the sites across the UK that have been involved in the trial. So, you know, clinical trials have often been, you know, in a small number of centres with specialist expertise. But the problem with that is the people. It's the people that live in different areas across the UK are not getting access to trials if there aren't local centres for them. So for me, it's fantastic to see that we've reached out. In Yorkshire, we had new sites in Bradford and Hull who hadn't ever done any MS research trials before. And if we want our trials to be representative of the population, we have to move out of London, dare I say, but into, across the country, so that we're offering opportunity to people from different populations across the whole UK. Okay, and here's all of us at the start of STAT2 and then at the end. So these are the investigators. And the important thing about the investigators, a lot of these are NHS clinicians who are running these trials. So, and I think that's really important, that they're not all academics, and a lot of this is delivered by real goodwill. Okay, and here's Joanne. So Joanne was in the STAT2 clinic recently, and I just asked Joanne if she would mind me taking some pictures of what's involved in, doing these trials. So we can see, I don't know if this works. So here's Joanne doing something called the 9-hole peg test. So that's moving the little pegs in and out of the box. So that's measuring hand function. And then here's Joanne doing a timed walking test. And then this is Martin, another of our research nurses, and doing the safety blood tests, which are really important. So we're keeping all the research participants safe. And then, neurological examinations bumped off. This is my colleague, Dr. Vinjam, who's doing the neurological examination. So there are lots of people involved in even one visit for a trial. And I asked Joanne why she had decided to take part in STAT2. And this is what Joanne said. And actually, you can tell it wasn't me telling her to take part, because her consultant suggested that what she could do was take part in the MS STAT2 trial. And actually now, it could be you could take part in Chariot MS, or you could take part in Octopus. So here we go. Nice segue into Chariot, which is run from QMUL, from Barts. And so Chariot extended things a bit more from where we were with STAT2. So the good thing is, and I think the important thing for you when you're thinking about the Stop MS appeal, is we are learning, we are developing these trials. So in the Chariot MS trial, I'll just show you that this is for people with more advanced MS, so people with a higher level of disability, but also people from an older age group as well. So this goes back to what I was saying about including people in trials and the trials being representative. So we have our lovely 9-hole peg test up here, but you can see that the trial, again, is a randomized trial, and the main focus of the cladribine trial is for people who are having problems with hand or arm function. Okay, and here are some of the backroom people, Lana and Tangil from the Chariot trial. So these are from the trials unit at Barts. And in Chariot, there are 20 trial sites now open across the UK, actively recruiting, with another 2 sites to come. And here, some people will recognize familiar faces from some of the investigators from all across the UK who are involved in Chariot MS. And I asked Paul, who's one of our Chariot MS trial participants, I asked him the same question about taking part in research, and he agreed to me showing his picture doing some of the testing in Chariot, because Chariot is focused on arm function. So you've seen the test we do with the little pegs, the 9-hole peg test, but this is a more complicated test of hand function, looking at lots of different tests. So you can see that Paul's starting off thinking it looks relatively straightforward, and then Martin starts to get all the rest of the kit out and see exactly the tasks that he's going to have to do. And this is what Paul said about taking part in trials for MS. And it was really that helping, thinking about people for the future. So thinking not about himself, that this trial would necessarily benefit him, but again, it's that hope for the future and for people that were coming through. He was thinking about people with a new diagnosis of progressive MS. Hopefully, these treatments will give some benefit. So I'm coming on to the tentacles now, and this is my little octopus. It looks large on this screen, but it's actually really tiny, about this big, not like Elsa's huge one. I received this in the post in a little brown package about a year ago, and it just arrived on my NHS desk, but it didn't have a message or anything in it at all. It was just like, okay, I know octopus is coming, but this is slightly creepy, you know? But I think Marie, who works at UCL, may have sent it to me, so it's sat on my desk ever since then. And these are some of the press releases from April when the octopus trial was first announced. So I think, as I said, we're at different stages with these studies. So STAT2, almost there, you know, in follow-up, but we're nearly finished. Chariot, still recruiting and, you know, offering hope for a different population. And then Octopus is, you know, as it says at the bottom, a new journey, really. So I'm just going to tell you, in terms of, my talk included technology, and there's so much technology, but just some of the background, really, to getting where we have with Octopus. And this is not for you to read all of the different drugs, but this is some of the work that goes on in drug discovery. So before we start any of these studies, there's been a huge amount of work, and you can see that this started back in 2018 with all of these different candidate drugs. So all of these different drugs are being considered and investigated to try to end up with which of the drugs are most likely to be effective in these trials. So before we even go into trials, these are drugs that have got some evidence of, you know, the way that they work should be beneficial for progressive MS. And then there's lots of work also then that goes in the lab with testing these drugs. So in Edinburgh, in the Anne Rowling Centre, in the labs there, they're doing amazing research at a sort of cellular level to look at how these different type of candidate drugs can work. So it's just amazing that behind the scenes all of this work is going on. And this is the first drug. You've mentioned the drugs. We're allowed to talk about them now. So there are, as Elsa said, there's alpha-lipoic acid is one of the drugs now in Octopus, and it's a naturally occurring compound. So it can pass easily into the brain, and it has anti-inflammatory properties. But I think most people, I'll just go back. Most people know about, we all hear about free radicals without really knowing anything about them except they're not good. So alpha-lipoic acid attacks the free radicals because free radicals do damage cells. And there is some previous research with lipoic acid in progressive MS. So what we're looking at here is brain atrophy, and the red line is the lipoic acid and the blue line is the placebo. And so it's reducing the level of brain atrophy, which is very promising. And then the other drug is metformin. Some of you may have family members who are on metformin. It's a very, very common drug, and it's used for diabetes. First made in 1922, and I didn't know this story about French lilac, which was used as a folk medicine to treat sweet urine, you know, so this is back thinking about diabetes. So it's first introduced in 1958. So the good thing about these repurposed drugs is they've been used by a lot of people, so we know about the safety. And this is just a study showing some effect on metformin, hopefully on remyelination. So again, very promising. So these are our candidate drugs for Octopus. And then the next big sort of technological thing is these new trials. So having gone from STAT2, which was a huge trial, but we're comparing one drug with another, well, with the placebo, basically, then we're now looking at the tentacle side of it, which is the multi-arm phase trial, looking at many different drugs at the same time. And again, this is work that's been done previously in prostate cancer, so it's really good, I think, in the MS community that we're learning from other areas, so that we're introducing things in MS clinical trials that have worked successfully in other areas. What I thought, many of you will be familiar with is the trials that were done during COVID, which I think, were one of the great successes. A lot of things didn't go well in the COVID pandemic, but the research response was amazing. And the idea of that was this adaptive trial platform. So if we think about COVID, then you might have a trial of an antibiotic, and then you might have a trial of an antivirus type of medicine, and you might have a trial of a steroid, and these trials would happen one after another. So it takes a long time, and you'd wait for the answer of the first one and then start the next trial. And what the multi-arm trial is able to do is test these different treatments at the same time. So you have a parallel here of randomizing people to the different treatments. Because if we do trials one after the other, as you all know, and the frustration sometimes that people feel with trials is that it's time-consuming to take part in a trial. It's hard work all round, and then we have to wait for the results, and then if the result is positive, then that's fantastic, isn't it? But if the result's negative, then we start all over again, and then we have to go through ethics approvals and opening sites and recruiting people to the studies. So what happened in COVID was truly amazing. Now, I mean, I think what we've got to remember is that MS is a long-term condition, so it's not like COVID, which is an acute condition, so things happened much faster than they can in MS. But if we look at this timeline, this is when they wrote their first draft protocol, and this is when they got their first patient enrolled. I mean, that's incredible, isn't it? And then one by one, they're just finding out whether treatments work or they don't work. So some treatments that we thought might have worked in COVID just didn't work at all, and other treatments really were of benefit. So things like aspirin wasn't effective. Colchicine, was that a certain president that was keen on colchicine? Oh no, that was another drug, wasn't it? Yeah. But actually, steroids were effective, so they got rapid answers, really. So this brings us on to, I feel each time I say octopus, you should almost this brings us on to octopus. And so it is using this method then of treating of using different arms in a trial, so different treatments. So you start with treatment 1, and treatment 2, and the control. And you do a study using MRI, and then if treatment 1 doesn't work, more people can join. It does work, more people can join, but if treatment 2 doesn't work, that arm is stopped. So it's actually a very efficient way of testing drugs and then backing the right horse in a way, getting the most likely candidate to take into a much bigger trial. And then what can happen is we start small, but then future treatments can come on. So it is a small trial at the start, but then going up to 600 people. And then the idea is we've created this wonderful trial platform. So going forward, we can bring in new experimental drugs into the platform. People are already involved. So just like happened in COVID, which ended up with international COVID, I don't know, Emma, I don't want to scare you by having international octopus, but we can make this bigger and bigger and test more experimental treatments. So Octopus, these are the sites that are going to take part. So we are a site, we're just on the cusp of opening. I really wanted to be able to tell you tonight we've opened in Leeds, but we haven't quite opened, but we will be opening in the next couple of weeks. Again, this is small scale but compared to the map we saw at the start of Stat 2, because this is the first phase of this, but we've got to think that this is an ongoing platform, and it's going to stop that breaking, doing one trial, having to start again. And for people who are interested in Octopus, for people who want to take part, there is a portal, and it's in the UKMS register, and you can register your interest. And then there's a pre-screening. So it's like people with MS can do the pre-screening themselves for taking part in the trial. Okay, so I think just in summary, this is what, for me, the Stop MS appeal is about, is it's this fantastic collaboration. I was just talking to Stuart and Marie, and they didn't know that their picture was going to be up here, but it's the collaboration between the amazing people who put so much time and effort into fundraising and supporting the MS Society, all of the people who fund initiatives like the Stop MS appeal, obviously the MS Society's team, but then also our trial leaders, people like Jeremy and Klaus who are developing these innovative trials, the clinical trials units who I feel are really very much in the background, but none of this would happen without them. People like Joanne who kindly agreed for me to take many pictures of her participating in the trial. And then these are some of the scientists that I met up in the labs in Edinburgh. And here's some of the Leeds team with their Stat 2 chocolates. But I mean, it's my great pleasure to work with a fantastic research team and clinical MS team in Leeds. So I'll just leave you with this, but I think for me, this is Stop MS. This is all about our amazing collaboration. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Helen. That was amazing. I mean, it was so insightful, and I hope that really brought clinical trials to life for you all. And honestly, it's my pleasure to work with people like Helen. And you're right, the collaboration is just absolutely key. Good evening, everyone. My name is Emma Gray, and I'm Assistant Director of Research at the MS Society, which means I have the wonderful job of actually working with all the people that Helen just showed you. And I'm really delighted to host our panel session this evening. So, do you want to come up here? So I was supposed to give the nod, sorry, I didn't do my job. I'll get sacked, it's fine. Where's Olga? And you. and Linford. Sorry, it's fine. We're fine, we're fine. Is everyone comfortable? Now that I've remembered to ask you to come up. Okay, so now they're all sat down, I will introduce our wonderful panel to you. So on the end, we've got Professor Olga Ciccarelli, who's NIHR Research Professor of Neurology at University College London. You've heard from Elsa Guidi already, participant in Octopus trial. Thank you again for sharing your story. It was lovely and very funny. Should be a stand-up. And Dr. Linford Fernandez, who's currently completing his clinical neurology training in West Yorkshire. And of course, Professor Helen Ford, who you've just heard from. I'll read out your credentials again because we should hear this. Consultant neurologist and clinical lead of West Yorkshire MS treatment programme at Leeds Teaching Hospital NHS Trust, and honorary clinical professor of neurology at the University of Leeds. So thank you very much. Okay, so I know many of you have submitted questions, and we will do our best to answer as many as we can. I'm sorry if a question doesn't get answered. I also can't see any questions. So just bear with us a second. Anyone got a joke?
Tina Turner.
No. Oh, yeah, that is Tina Turner.
Simply the best, Emma.
Do I have to press something? I mean, I could. Hang on. Oh, a good question. How many followers does Does the octopus have on Instagram?
The octopus currently has 15 followers.
Okay, we can change this. We can change this.
I just started it with photographs, and I don't really know what I'm doing, so I've just done it very personally. I know you've got to put hashtags and ats in and all that. That will come. It's now got, I think it's got 26 posts, and now I feel like if more followers come, there's more to see. So we'll see. Ask me this time next year.
Don't have any questions. We can. Oh no, I have. Okay, right. First question, Linford. Can I ask you this question? And maybe actually, all the clinicians might want to answer this. Does all the pressure at the NHS at the moment have a knock-on effect on trials like this? Linford, do you want to?
Yeah. So from my point of view, just completing my junior doctor training and going into a consultancy, I think. We always hear about the NHS being under pressure, and I think the important thing is what Helen identified during her talk about trying to keep time for patients to come for trials and always trying to have capacity for these trials. And although there is always going to be pressure on clinical services, I think it's always important to have a pipeline for trials and research so that the patients who do come to hospital, as well as having the standard treatments, are able to access treatments that are not available in years to come, and that can only happen through trial work. So I think it's always important to try and keep aspects of that, no matter how pressurized you are.
What about UCL, Olga? How's things?
Oh, it's massive. I'm actually surprised Linford is not on strike. Or is going to be on strike.
A few weeks ago.
And one coming. So it's massive pressure. Honestly, it's very difficult because we are under pressure to deliver a service which has to be useful and reactive and respond to needs. And as a consultant, we have 15 minutes consultation. So what can you fit in 15 minutes? Not very much, especially if there is a significant problem that needs to be discussed. So talking about research in the middle of a very busy clinical activities is difficult, but when we do, and then when people join trial, and then any trials, I agree with what Helen said, even a simple donation of a blood for a biobank is useful. And then when you see octopus on the BBC News, how that felt. Was that good? That was amazing, no? There was an incredible media coverage, I think, Octopus got, and that was all thanks to the incredible work of the MS Society and Emma above everyone, I think. And then there was really a very successful story. And I want to say one that maybe a lot of people are not aware of. I mean, Octopus is the first ever multi-arms, multi-stage trial in neurology. So a lot of people are learning from Octopus, other specialties are learning from Octopus, and other neurological diseases are going to be treated using outcomes of multi-stage, multi-arms design. So I know the Parkinson disease group are setting up a multi-arms, multi-stage design, learning from our experience. The same with Alzheimer. The Alzheimer research is going to fund a multi-arm, multi-stage trials. So it's all learning from our experience. And what is really attractive, I know, I start talking and never ends.
I can stop you if you want to.
That's going to be all night talking like that.
Cut you off.
No,
You've got 1 minute.
1 minute. One last thing. You know what, Helen showed you the future that you can add extra arms. So hopefully the vision is that eventually a trial company, another investigator-led group, someone else will decide to add an arm. So for them it will be very much a saving because they don't have to design the whole trials again. They don't have to re-recruit all placebo, people on placebo. That will continue anyway. They just have to buy another arm. And then this will carry on. And then eventually this is just the beginning of the next 15 years of research in MS, progressive MS. Okay, I'm not talking anymore. Finish my
But I'm not going to give you the next question, are we?
No.
Actually, no, what you've discussed actually has come up as the next question. So you've talked about the benefits, I know, Helen, you have of multi-arm, multi-stage. So I guess the question from somebody is that kind of why haven't we done this before? Like why has it taken this long to do it? Why haven't we done it before?
I mean, I think there's something about how do you compare different drugs to one placebo arm. And there's a lot around the statistics involved in comparing these different arms, and also on making judgments pretty early, really, on whether an arm is effective or not. And you have to actually come to a decision around, do you drop that drug? And obviously it's tricky, isn't it? Because you don't want to lose a drug that could potentially be effective. So I think it's all of this modelling of the work, really, to see how can you be sure, that the data that you're getting and the statistical analysis is right, so that you can actually prove that this drug should go forward, or actually this drug needs to go.
Yeah, I mean, I can say from my experience of working with the community to develop Octopus, there's so many complexities. It's like sometimes the simplest thing is actually the hardest thing. So it's a simple paradigm, but you've got to get funders in place. You've got to make sure it's accessible for patients. You've got to do the design. So it really is. It's actually a lot of work for something that's such a simple concept. But I think that's a really good question, and completely understand that. Okay, Elsa, can I ask you a question? Were you worried about potentially being on a placebo?
I know that being involved in a trial, for whatever magical reason, has a really good impact. Maybe, as your other participants said, that you have more contact with clinicians or things like that. So anyway, being involved in a trial is good for you. There is then a slight mind game about, if I read the side effects, do I wish I had those? Because that would mean I wasn't on a placebo. Or,
have you played that game?
I've played that game, but when I went back for my first appointment with Sean at UCL, he said to me, have you heard of the nocebo effect, which is that you get side effects even though you're on the placebo. So then at that point I just thought, okay, it's an absolute mind game. You just have to say, the best thing for me is to be on this trial. The wonderful thing about repurposed drugs is you don't have any fear that they're not okay for humans, they're fine. And if you're on it, the quicker we get it going, the more progress is going to be made. So no, I think I have put the placebo thought to bed and just said, maybe I'm on that, maybe I'm on the other ones, doesn't really matter.
Okay, thank you. Helen, one for you, and I know this is a topic that's important to you as well. So someone said here that they volunteered to take part in Octopus, but they're 74, so for this trial we're too old for that. Why is that, they're asking? Why at 74?
Yeah. So I think it's difficult, isn't it? I think there is some evidence that, as people get older, that MS changes, and so that it becomes much less inflammatory. So I think it is an area that there's a lot more discussion about really now, because people are living well with MS into older age. So I think that's one of the reasons in Chariot they didn't have the upper age limit. So I think that in Octopus we have it extended, and I guess when we look back at MS trials that have been done and the big pharmaceutical company trials, the upper age limit was 55. So we've pushed it quite a lot up to 70. So I think what will be interesting is to see, when we analyse the different populations in these big trials, is there a difference really between the different age groups? So I think that will be important to see. So I guess what I would say is we have really extended the age boundaries from how it was before in the clinical trials.
Yeah. I think also for Octopus, because it's a flexible design, if, like Helen says, if the data changes, you can, with some statistics, I don't want to play that bit down, but you can change some of the design of these trials. Okay, another question. Oh, if I give this one to you, will it be quick?
You talk for 2 minutes.
I might regret this. So
yeah, I'll do my best.
Okay, do your best. Come The question is, what are you looking for with the MRIs in octopus? So I guess what's the biology you're looking at? And someone's asking, is it myelin repair you're looking for with these interim scans?
Yes, so the MRI is the first intermediate point. So if we can see an effect of the drug on the MRI, then that means that the drug is likely to have an impact on progression, so can continue into phase 2. So we're just looking for an early signal of efficacy. And the MRI marker that we're using is brain atrophy, which, as you know, our brain is shrinking over time. Healthy subjects have about a 0.5% decrease of brain volume over time. People with MS can get up to 1%. People with Alzheimer's go an average of 2 to 3%. So there is, we cannot stop brain atrophy, even healthy subjects. So this is something that's happening. And if there is an impact on brain atrophy, that means that the drug will eventually help to slow down progression. So we're looking for an early signal. It's very tough because you could think that some drugs maybe will have an impact on progression. They just need more time to get that impact, but we cannot afford that. So with statistics, we say, okay, we have 18 months. Does your brain lose volume less quickly? Yes. That means that the drug has a possibility of being effective, so we can continue in stage 2.
That was succinct, thank you.
Pass the interview.
Does anyone else want to add anything to that? No? Okay. Okay, next question. I don't know, Helen, I think you touched on this on your lecture, but maybe if there's anything else you wanted to say. Will octopus focus on existing drugs? So I think, kind of meaning repurposed, kind of off-patent type drugs, or is it a research program that could lead to the development of new treatments and new drugs?
Yeah, so I think that's the exciting thing about developing the platform. So that's why I sort of said that we're at the start of this journey, because we're using the repurposed drugs to start with. But actually, there's no reason at all that then other drugs, experimental drugs, can come into the trial platform. And there is some work in motor neurone disease, actually, looking at, with an adaptive trial platform. So in the US, there's a big platform called the Healy platform in motor neurone disease, set up pretty recently, but they are testing different experimental drugs given in different ways, intravenous drugs. So I think if we look at what's happened there in the Healy platform, I'm sure in MS that we will move on from repurposed drugs. I mean, hopefully the repurposed drugs will be useful, but I think the whole idea of the platform is that we can get, grow and have experimental drugs coming in.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, someone's asked a technical question, if anyone can answer this, is can you take part if you can't have MRIs to octopus? Helen, can you take that one?
Well, I would think not in this phase, but the good thing about octopus is, so as Olga was saying, this early stage is really like a very early stage of a trial, and it's using MRI as a way to pick up changes more quickly. But what's going to happen is then, if one of these drugs, drug A or drug B, shows that it's successful, then that will go into a much bigger clinical trial, a bit more like STAT2, where we had almost 1,000 participants. And in STAT2, we don't use MRI at all. Yeah. So I think the important thing is that I think it's important that everyone doesn't think, oh, if I need to be an octopus, I need to get in now, because that's just not the case, actually. This is going to be a long-term program, and if one of the drugs looks successful, it will be a really big study then, but it won't be based on MRI. It will be based on some of the tests that I showed you, some of our participants doing, the walking tests, the hand function tests, so much more tests that people with MS are doing. So I think, I wouldn't want people to feel that they're not going to be part of octopus if they can't have MRI, because certainly in the next phase there won't be MRI as the outcome.
So the 15 sites that Helen showed, those ones are the ones that are able to do MRI, and then I
was just going to say that, yeah, I totally agree with you. Don't be put off by thinking that you're not eligible. they will tell you, and definitely in the eligibility appointment that I had, I did have to lie still properly and behave well in the MRI. But I really don't like them, so I was really proud of myself that I passed and was eligible because I could tolerate that very long MRI. But that is, as you said, that is how it is right now. So more do the survey, get involved, and then at some point, as you're saying, you hopefully will be able to do.
So the second stage won't have MRI. So I think it's also really important that people who, not just, as I say, don't like it, that sounds like I'm belittling it, I'm not, but people who physically can't get into a scanner. So for the second stage, after the interim analysis, the recruitment will start for the stage 2, and that won't require MRI. So as the panel said, you register your interest, but it doesn't mean that it's over for now. It's just the first bit. I think the first stage will take a couple of years to recruit, and then people will be able to join later on. So, have a look at the register's website. Okay, got time for one more? Looking at my minder over here. Okay, so the question is, does the collaboration, I know Helen kind of alluded to this, does this collaboration extend internationally? And will Octopus be rolled out in other countries? I mean, I can answer that if you don't want to answer that. I mean, not at the moment, but we would love that, I think is the short answer.
And it did make me think when I was preparing the talk and looking at the recovery trial, that they had, they've got that international collaboration, and they've got the recovery platform in many different countries now. So, so yes, that's the future, Emma.
And if anyone's Stop MS Appeal lecture kind of fans, and you've seen a previous lecture from Max Palmer and Jeremy Chataway, I think Max showed the Stampede prostate cancer trial, which is what we were hugely inspired by, and they have international arms. So we very much hope so. But I think the important thing at the moment is we've got to get it built in the UK using our fantastic NHS, and then we'll take over the world. Okay, I think I'm going to start. Can I ask a question? Oh yeah, I forget I'm in charge. So I guess, can I ask each of you this? So I think, Helen, your lecture was fantastic at showing kind of in a short space of time we now have what we never thought would happen is 3 progressive MS trials. We wouldn't have imagined that 10 years ago. So if we did this lecture in 10 years' time, what do you think the topic would be? Ooh. Go on, Olga. You can go first. You all have to give a very short answer because I think people want a drink. Not because of your answer, just because we have to move on.
In 10 years' time, that's interesting. I think there will be new technologies, and it will be about integration of new technologies into the NHS and research.
Okay. Yeah, so what could you imagine the topic in 10 years' time? Or what would you like it to be?
10 years' time,
Would the Octopus be here?
I think the Octopus will be there, although it will be totally rammed because of all its Instagram followers, obviously. No, I think the topic could be, oh, look what we did, and wasn't it amazing? And now we're doing it in all these different countries. And aren't we taking it to places where, because we're so lucky in the UK, aren't we, with all that we have? And maybe it's worked here. In 10 years' time, we're taking it somewhere where it's really new, a different part of the world, which is a really new experience in that part of the world.
And what do you think? 10 years' time, what would your title be?
I would, I started as a consultant around the same time as you were diagnosed. So, and I started to set up the treatment program in Leeds. And over that time period, so much has changed in MS in an amazing way, so in terms of all of the treatments that we have for relapsing, remitting MS, I think it may be much more about earlier treatment. So I think there are already work looking at people who've got abnormalities on their MRI who maybe have had an MRI because of headache, they haven't got symptoms due to MS, or there's work looking at what happens before actually people have their first episode of MS, so there's really interesting studies looking, particularly coming from Canada, looking at what they call the prodrome of MS. So I think we'll be pushing earlier into using treatments potentially. And then I think more learning from other conditions. So there are very novel types of cell treatments that are used in hematology which might come into MS. So that's where I would think pushing the boundaries back.
What about you, Linford?
I can't give a title for 10 years, but I think I was going to say...
Well, you might be invited in 10 years. You might be up here giving the lecture.
Well,
Yeah.
So you know, for you to find a title.
well, yeah, I'll work on it at 10 years, but I think it'll become much more personalized, because I think there are so many things we're still finding out in terms of the genetics of MS, epigenetics, biomarkers, and everyone here knows that everyone's MS affects people differently, and why it does that. So I think certainly we'll be looking at a much more personalized treatment plan for patients, whether it's using their genetics and, you know, doing a genetic test within a week and, you know, looking at how we can then develop a treatment program for them. So I'm really hopeful that it'll become much more personalized and different treatments that are equally as effective for different people.
That was a really nice range of answers, actually. Thank you. So I think that's all our time we have for questions. So thank you very much for your attention here at home. Thank you to the panel. You survived your grilling. And you can now have a drink and rest. And I'm delighted to hand back to Sarah Rawlings.
That actually brings us to the end of the lecture tonight, and thank you so much again for joining us both online and in person. For those of you who are in person, please do stay and join us for drinks. You can chat to other wonderful researchers and staff from the MS Society as well. Thank you again for joining us this evening.